Hey guys, and welcome to episode 5 of Mindful Self-Indulgence. So unlike the last 4 episodes this week, I've not prepared a blog post, unfortunately, to read out, which is unfortunate, but I do have a very long episode at hand, and I'm really excited to say that today is actually our first guest episode. And before I tell you guys a little bit more about that, I want to just update you guys on a couple of things that we've been working on. So this week we have launched our Patreon page, and we love Patreon because Patreon's a way that allows you guys to support creators like myself and other podcasters out there in a really cool way. And the way that I love to kind of think of it is, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, Omar's a cool guy, I'd probably take him out for a cup of coffee or a pint or a lunch or something, once a month, and just have a chat with him. And if that's the case, then don't hesitate to kind of do the same with the podcast and go visit our Patreon page. And whether it's $1, $2, $3, $5, $10, whatever it is that you can do, that would be absolutely awesome and is really appreciated. And I'm hoping that I can get better equipment, put some videos to the podcast, animate some of the podcast content, and there's a lot of things that I would like to do, and by us kind of working together as a joint contribution towards that, I'm sure that we will get there one day as well. But yeah, do visit the Patreon page at www.patreon.com/mindful self-indulgence podcast. It's really simple to kind of set yourself up, and like I say, it is very helpful for me. It's very helpful for a lot of creators out there. It's awesome that Patreon has allowed a platform like that to kind of go ahead, because without it, we do put a lot of time into podcasting. It does take a lot of our time, and I think without it, a lot of podcasts won't have ended up growing the way that they did. They won't have ended up reaching as many people as they did as well, or even just kind of getting a hint of the support that they are getting. So yeah, www.patreon.com/mindful self-indulgence podcast. And you can also use the Mindful Self-Indulgence podcast if you're searching on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, to give us some feedback on the episode or the show, or if you would like to send in content or art, as I mentioned the last episode, that would be absolutely great as well. We're going to start getting our episodes on YouTube as well for people that do want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, but it should be easy enough to find on Spotify, on Acast, on Spotify, and on SoundCloud. Have I said Spotify before? I might. But anyway, you can find us on all these platforms and listen to the last 4 episodes. Now, to today's episode, I was in contact with this person before we recorded the episode for a bit, and we were just chatting about the different things that we can do in the podcast and the different things that we can talk about. And we decided to discuss a new, what we'd call a new approach to psychology, or one that is very new to myself. I'm really pleased to say that today we have the very amazing Chana Studley as a guest. The reason that I say the amazing guest is because listening to Hannah's story, it's a great one of someone who's went from feeling really depressed and really down and feeling like their whole world was just a square space around them, to overcoming that and going on to do amazing things and live quite a full life. And she's now working as a counsellor to help more and more people. Today we're going to discuss her approach to counselling and her approach to psychology, which is called the 3 perspectives. So I'm not going to give too much of an introduction here. It is going to be the longest episode that we have, but it's full of information and I'm really pleased to be putting it out. So I hope you guys like it as much as I do. Please don't forget to give us feedback as mentioned, and enjoy. Yes, we're live and going. So how are you doing today, Chana?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, it is an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming on. It's great to have someone like yourself coming on, because I always say in my podcast that I am not a psychology professional. I work in
a very different industry in my personal and day-to-day life. So it's awesome to have people who are integrated in the industry more and more than myself that can kind of show an insight on different perspectives and different ways of psychology, because psychology is so broad, isn't it? We can look at it from so many different ways, and there's so many different ways of looking at it. And a lot of people think of it as such a controversial topic, because you have to kind of worry about your language, and you have to worry about what you say and what it is that you're talking about with, for instance, your clients and stuff. But before we go like in today's topic, and I start kind of questioning you about everything that you know and juicing your brain, the first thing that I want to discuss with you is your name. So how is it exactly that you would say your name? Because I know it's spelled Chana, right? So
right.
Chana?
Right, it's pronounced Chana.
Chana.
Because it's a Hebrew name. In English, it would be Hannah, like
Hannah.
with just an H.
Yeah.
And if people want to say Hannah, that's just fine. Because people often say, "Oh, hi, Chana." I'm like, no, that's not my name.
I know this.
Yeah. So no, it's Hannah, like the ch in Hebrew, if you can say that, but it's not a problem.
So what does that? Is there a specific meaning, or would it be the same as Hannah, or?
It's the same name. I mean, what I learned was that I'm named after a woman from the Bible, and she was in the time of the temple here in Jerusalem, and she had gone to the temple to pray. She hadn't had children, and so she was desperately praying for children with such passion that the high priest in the temple thought she was drunk, and he was like, "Get away, drunken lady, get away from the temple, crazy lady." And she said, "No, I'm just praying so much from my heart that it's like her whole body was into the prayers."
Yeah, so bad.
And it had such an effect on her. And she said to the priest, if God grants my prayer and I'm blessed with a son, I will dedicate him to the temple. And she did. She conceived. She had a son. His name was Samuel. He was the prophet Samuel, and or Shmuel, as we say in Hebrew. And she gave him over at the age of 3, and he was brought up in the temple to be the great prophet that we know of and have his writings now. So I was named after her. So a very passionate and very persistent woman. Don't give up.
No, I mean that's really cool. It's actually, I didn't know that was kind of there's a story behind the name Hannah as well. It's like, I think names are just kind of flung about. We never kind of stop to figure out what the story behind them are, or what the meaning behind them are, which to some people is absolute nonsense. They don't really care about it at all. But I think I just get really interested about the small finite stories behind everything. But yeah, I can't tell you any good stories behind Omar. It's very he's flung about name.
Apart from the movie star, that's the only thing I can think of.
Omar Sharif, yeah, that's actually my full name as well. It's a great conversation starter in parties.
I actually was going to tell you that my parents' first date was going to see Dr. Zhivago.
Really?
Yeah, that was their first date, and we had the album. We had the album. It was in our record collection when I was growing up. So yeah.
I think coming from Egypt, because he's from Egypt himself, and coming from Egypt where he started as, like his career there, obviously doing all his movies in Arabic, and then going to the outside world. When I moved here, I started to realize how big he actually was worldwide.
Yeah.
Because I just thought, like he's done a couple of movies, people know about him, but so many people.
Oh, huge star.
Huge star, yeah. He had a full life. That's what I like to kind of say about him. He did a lot of things that he wanted to do. But enough about me and Omar Sharif, taken away from his successes. But yeah, I think today the main thing that I'd like to kind of discuss with you is, when I was looking at your work and looking at what it is that you kind of started to do, I saw that you started your career in a completely different field than counselling and psychology. You're actually an Academy Award winner for your work on movies, are you not?
Yes, but I just want to point out that it was as a team member.
Yes.
The work I was doing, it took a lot of people to do that. I actually did special effects.
Okay.
And so it really was a team effort. And actually special effects, I find are a great way to explain a lot of the things that go on in our minds, because my whole job in movies was to convince you something was real that wasn't.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that was our success, was if you thought it was real. So I actually was known for making animatronic puppets. I was always freelance, but I worked mostly for Jim Henson's Creature Shop. Jim Henson, who made Kermit and Miss Piggy and, the Muppets.
That's my childhood right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the Muppets were done in New York, and Jim had a workshop in London where we made creatures for other movies. Like, they weren't Muppet movies. We were just a creature shop that made special effects for anybody's movie who would, wanted to hire us to do that. And so I actually became known for making copies of real animals. So if a story had a real animal in it that had to talk or get run over or do something that an animal can't do or is not allowed to do, then we would copy exactly that animal, and they would cut from the real animal to my puppet, and you won't know the difference.
Wow.
So when I tell people about the movies I worked on, they say, there's no puppets in that movie. And I go, thank you. Great.
That's exactly
that's why we got an Academy Award, because, and that was for the movie Babe, which is all farm animals talking.
Yeah.
And people say, there's no puppets in that. I said, well, does your dog talk? It's like, right? Have you seen a pig talking? Right. So that was our job, is to fool you into thinking that this is real or this could actually happen.
Yeah.
I mean, all movies do that, but with special effects specifically, whether it's an earthquake happening or a dog talking, it's like that was our job, and it was a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun, and I got for 20 years I got to travel around the world and meet the most amazing people and work on some really great big, huge big projects with big famous people. I did Dr. Doodle with Eddie Murphy and say Big Babe and George of the Jungle, and I made some wings for John Travolta. He was in a movie called Michael. He was an angel, so I made some wings for him, and I got to dance with him, which is one of the highlights of my career.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome.
And so we had a great time. Yeah.
That sounds great. That sounds absolutely great. And it's quite cool as well to kind of see that there was a how does your mind work aspect to it from the start, that you were kind of always pulled towards that. There was some sort of pull towards like how the brain works, even if it was a bit subconscious.
So what actually happened is, before the Hollywood career, I was just to go back a little bit. In my college time, I was actually attacked. I had several muggings happen to me. I was in Manchester University, and whilst I was actually a student, I was in a nightclub at a concert, and some guy wanted to dance with me, and I said no. He pushed me, and I felt his hand on the back of my head, and he smashed my head into a concrete pillar on the side of the dance floor and fractured my skull. And I actually recovered from that one quite well. It was just, everybody said, this kind of things happen when you're a student, you fall over, concert, blah, blah, blah. And so about 2 years later, after I'd finished college, I was walking in my neighborhood about 6 o'clock in the evening, and 3 men came running up from behind and jumped me to the ground and beat the living daylights out of me. And I really thought I was going to die that time. It was absolutely terrifying. Yeah. And so I got quite sick after the second mugging, agoraphobic, and I wasn't sleeping or eating, and got in quite a bad way. And I really went into a very, very dark place. And because I had no idea what to do. And I'd actually trained as a counsellor whilst I was a student. I trained with the Manchester Rape Crisis Centre in the early 80s, which, looking back now at the history of trauma counselling, those were quite rare. There were only a few of them in the world. Manchester had one for women to, and we were taught to answer the hotline, and we would go out to community centres and give talks, and I had to go to talk to nurses and social workers, and because this was all a new concept that, that women's rights and all that stuff. Yeah. And I even went to court a few times, with women who were having to go through a very painful experience, having to relive it in the courtroom. So I think I've always wondered why I didn't ask for help. Here I was suffering at home in what is now called PTSD, because that was only just going into the DSM, the book of what psychiatrists and psychologists use as a directory of mental illnesses. And so all I got was a cup of tea and a taxi home. That's all I got. I mean, my friends were amazing. They did their best, but they didn't really know what was happening because I didn't tell anyone. I think because I trained as a counsellor, I had a story in my head that I should be able to cope, and I shouldn't be suffering. So I just did that very British thing of like stiff upper lip and like I'm gonna like, and I got really kind of a bit loopy in my head. And so it got to the point where I decided I didn't want to live like this anymore, and I moved down to London. I thought, change of location, which I now know is called a geographical, right? Change of location is all going to be different.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? But the problem was, my thinking went with me, and even bigger problem was I got attacked again, and I was mugged again by a 16-year-old kid. I'd started working in the theatre at this point, and I was coming home from the theatre. I was riding my bike. Everybody had mountain bikes then. That was great for like exercising.
London was known for it, yeah.
Right, so I was riding my mountain bike home about 10 o'clock in the evening, and I remember at the corner of my eye, I saw this 16-year-old kid, and he was on a really small child's bike, and I remember thinking, that's weird, why would he be on like a 5-year-old's bike? Yeah. Next thing I knew, the bike came flying through the air at my head. Ouch. I was riding this way very fast. You imagine it was like, bam! It was like being shot out of a cannon at a brick wall. That was like the impact. He knocked me off my bike, and my head was literally in the gutter. Like, there were cars whizzing past my head. I mean, how I wasn't run over, I thank God, And he took my bike from underneath me, made off with it. And I heard later that he sold it for about 50 quid, which is about $70, for the next day. I didn't know this, but he actually broke my neck. It's amazing how the human body is designed and how we can hold it together. My body, I knew there was the next few days I was in a lot of pain, but I was, determined, and I actually had an interview at the BBC the next day, and I was determined to get there. I got through the interview and then collapsed on the way home. But it wasn't until 2 years later, when I was actually working on a movie. I was actually working on Babe. We were in Australia, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and my chin was stuck down on my collarbone. And I was screaming in pain, and I managed to get to a chiropractor the next day, and luckily he had an x-ray machine, because we were out in the middle of the bush. We were in the middle of nowhere, really. And he x-rayed my neck, and he said, "Did you know your neck was broken?" And I'm like, and I immediately had thoughts of like, this is it. I'm going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, or surgery, or like, And he was amazing. He got full movement back in my neck. I mean, he couldn't touch me without me screaming for the first week, and then it's amazing. That was almost 30 years ago now, and I haven't had to have surgery, and I haven't been in a wheelchair, and I've, thank God, got full movement back. It's just amazing. So this is a long answer to your question, but the coaching, counseling career and the entertainment business career kind of then went on simultaneously, because the kind of movies I worked on, they were so specialized that there was rare to have one after the other. There was usually a break of maybe 2 or 3 months in between each movie. So then I would use that time to go and work with people and have clients and volunteer at places, and so I kept up the coaching and counseling as I was still working in the movie business as well.
Is that the same now? Are you just kind of doing both now, or are you just concentrating on the counseling more than anything?
Yeah, I actually left the film business about 10 years ago now. I kind of realized, I've been thinking about it for a while. We used to call it the golden handcuffs. Yeah. Because it's like, okay, I'll do another movie with Brad Pitt, and okay, all right, my last movie I worked on was actually with Brad Pitt in it, but it's like, okay, all right, I'll do another one, and it's a high class problem to have, so. But in my heart, I really knew I wanted to be doing something more meaningful, more, I mean, you know, like, so I was thinking, should it be documentaries maybe, or should I, you know, and I just, actually the last movie I turned down was Stuart Little. I remember it was Stuart Little. It's about the little mouse and he's in a car and
yes,
in New York City.
Of course I know Stuart Little. Like, this
right,
is
so,
like my childhood. Right. It's amazing.
So I was supposed to be the supervisor. They offered me the job as a supervisor of all those creatures and all those effects, you know, and it was filmed right there in LA, and it was like, and you know, it wasn't the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was certainly a big one. You know, I remember looking at the phone thinking, as soon as I call the producer and tell her I can't do this job, that's it, my career's over.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And I called her, I said, I'm really sorry, but I can't do this. And that was it. You know, because there are plenty of other people who'd want to take my job, my place. So I stopped and I became a school teacher. I taught for 5 years, as well as carrying on the counselling. And here I do the coaching and counselling is really my work now. And I just published my first book. It's a novel. I put a lot of these ideas into a novel. And I published that in January, which is going really well. So.
That's awesome. And can you tell us a little bit more about the novel? I know it's called The Myth of Low Self-Esteem.
Right.
So give us a little kind of hint as to what it is. Is it about yourself? Is it kind of like, are you the main character in it, or is there no character? Is it kind of a self-help book?
So it's kind of self-help fiction, which sounds a bit cheesy, but I can't think of another way to describe it.
Yeah.
It's about a girl called Deborah, and Deborah, like, once now you know, like, my story, you'll see a lot of my story in her, because this is interesting for me anyway. I never thought of myself as a writer, because I'd always used my hands, and thank God I've been very successful with my hands and my imagination, you know, my creativity, and got a lot of success and compliments through that work. I hadn't written anything since I was in high school, which was quite a long while ago, and so people had often said to me, "Oh, you should write a book," and the people who knew about my Hollywood experiences, because I had a lot of stories there, you can imagine. You know, that to write those stories down. And then people knew about the trauma and how I'd survived, you know, these 3 attacks, and people said, you should write a book about that. So, and then I came across some new ideas in psychology that really got me really excited and interested, and kind of put the whole story together, that everything was now connected. So I decided to make up a fictional character called Deborah, and use my stories to illustrate a journey of coming from darkness, you know, the trauma darkness, through the career of, like, you know, traveling with the Hollywood career, into the healing of like seeing that, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel, that you can, you know, there is a way out. Because I think a lot of people who've gone through that kind of dark place are either believe or sometimes are told that they're broken, that, you know, that they're going to have to work on that for the rest of their life. You know, this is going to something that's going to, like, has marked you, has broken you, that you need fixing. And I'm on a mission now to tell people that in my experience, that's not true, is that I'm not broken. I didn't need fixing. I just had an innocent misunderstanding of what was happening to me. And so in the book, I kind of put these ideas together, and Deborah kind of discovers these new ideas, and she sees how to use that to help other people. And so that there's a happy ending. That's absolutely awesome, and it's great that you've kind of just mentioned that as well, because in the last episode of our podcast, we discussed negative automatic thoughts, the sort of ABC technique, CBT, and how to challenge your negative automatic thoughts and the different kind of types of them. You know, whether it's catastrophizing or just like black or white, all or nothing thinking. And I think that's very kind of similar to what you were kind of going through, because, and I don't blame you, because if things keep going wrong or going on wrong, you start to just go, well, life's out to get me, isn't it? Like, this is generally all that it's going to be. It's never going to get any better, and this is my life now. Imagine. I really thought that. I really thought that, because, like you said, I had evidence. You know, it's like some people are unfortunate to get mugged once.
Yeah.
Twice is really bad.
Yeah.
3 times?
Yeah.
Come on. There is like something out there in the universe out to get me.
Yeah.
And I kind of got to such a scary place at the end there where I was terrified to leave my apartment, because I knew that if I went out my door, a bus was going to run me over, because I was the innocent victim. Like, I hadn't done anything wrong. First time, I was just out with my friends. Second time, it was 6 p.m. in the evening. It wasn't like I was, in South Central LA in the middle of the night, which I have done, and and I survived. And I remember the thought of even just going down into the Underground station in London. I just knew someone would push me in front of a train, because that's how my life was. It was some kind of like Murphy's Law, like I didn't really understand or believe in God or anything like that at the time. I kind of thought there was must be something about me that, I'm just not supposed to be here much longer, and it got that dark. And I remember getting to the point where I was pinned to my bedroom wall in absolute fear. It was like my world had shrunk to about 2 feet around me. I couldn't even get out of my bedroom at that point. And absolutely terrified. And I had this very strange experience, and I kind of wrote about this in the book, and how my mind for several years since the second attack had been speeding up and getting faster and faster in the reliving a loop of reliving the experience, and not just reliving the men attacking me, but also reliving people's response. And I'd actually gone to the police station and given a report, and the police were very dismissive, like, we've got more important things to deal with than girls getting, beat up. Yeah. I'm like, they almost killed me, and so being dismissed, it kind of compounded this feeling that I had no value, I wasn't important, and I'm not supposed to be here anymore. And my thinking got so loud and so ferocious and painful in my head, this constant negativity, that in that moment when I was pinned up against the wall, suddenly it all went quiet. And it was really spooky, and I don't know how else to explain it other than the best analogy I've come up with is, I don't know, I mean, maybe the girls listening will understand this, like when you use the hairdryer and it overheats and it'll just cut out.
Yeah.
It's just the way that electricians made hair dryers. It's a safety thing. Yeah. That's so that it doesn't burst into flames. It just cuts out. Right. And so I think that's the way that we're made. It was like a safety thing in the wisdom of how human beings are designed. Yeah. Is that my brain was overheating so much with all this pain, it just cut out. And it went quiet. And it was a bit spooky at first, because I was like, what? Yeah. What was that? It took a bit of getting used to, and I have to tell you, it's not stayed perfect peace ever since. That it's like I'm a human being, and can have things happen, and I've been on a journey since then. Very interesting one, but for me it was the beginning of seeing that the way I'm experiencing the world is happening in my head. And that was kind of how the book goes on, is my character explores different ways of dealing with that human experience. And for a long time, I thought I could see that negative thinking was clearly a problem and clearly not working. Yeah. So I replaced that with positive thinking. And don't get me wrong, I think positive thinking is far better than negative thinking, obviously. But I was doing that for quite a while in different formats, and I came across things like the Course in Miracles and the Enneagram and lots of very interesting things. There's so many wonderful things out there of ways of understanding what happens to us, and so what I've come to realize that the paradigm of psychology that I really makes sense to me now, that's kind of given me a vocabulary for all of this. Has kind of it's helped me see that we're always living through an experience of our thinking. That's never not true. Yeah. There's never a time when I'm not experiencing my thinking. Yeah. We're always feeling our thinking. And so I was thinking about an example I was just sharing with a client recently about how you can wake up in the morning and hear the birds singing. And that could be the most wonderful, beautiful thing. And on another morning, I'm like, oh, shut up. Yeah. It's really annoying.
Definitely. Yeah.
Right. So it's not the birds haven't changed. It's my perception of them. It's my thinking about them that's changed. My level of consciousness has gone up or down. And so this is what interests me now. And when I'm working with someone, and I do a lot of work with trauma and with physical pain, and so I'm always directing people to see that what they're actually experiencing is their thoughts about a specific situation.
Yeah. So it's all about kind of challenging the thoughts, rationalizing the thoughts, would you say, into like changing your perception about what's happened or what it is that you're going through?
See, I think that's what I was doing before.
Mm-hmm.
In that, for example, the policeman that was very dismissive of me, I hated him for years.
Yeah.
I just would think about him, and my, my shoulders would go up, and like my stomach would like turn over, because it would just take me back to that very, very painful time.
Yeah.
And then, about a year or so after the attack in Manchester, I was actually awarded some system money by the government. They have a criminal injuries compensation system, mm-hmm. and I got this nice big check. In fact, the check I got from them paid for my first visit to America, and I bought a plane ticket with it, and I'm like went and spent a friend in Los Angeles, and sat on the beach in LA, and I was like, this is better.
Yeah.
So, and then I was telling someone about this, and they said, well, and I remember thinking, like, how did they know? How did they know about this? And someone said to me, well, the police must have done a report. And I suddenly realized that policeman who had dismissed me and been so horrible had actually finished the paperwork and handed it in and got me a nice little chunk of money.
Yeah.
So it completely changed my thoughts about him.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think he could have handled the situation better, but
definitely.
But it's amazing how what I started seeing is a lot of us, and I know I was very guilty of this, think that we feel the way we do because of something out there is either triggering it or provoking it. I feel good because I got a compliment. I feel bad because my boss, just gave me a bad review, or I got a phone bill that I wasn't expecting, or something. It's like we all think there's something outside there. If you just treat me right, then I'll feel better. Yeah. And what I started seeing was that I can feel worse or better depending on how my thoughts are. So to go back to your question of challenging them, or I've learned actually not to do that, because the thing I see now is that thought is a gift. It really is a gift, and I have no idea what I'm saying right now, but it's some kind of spooky spiritual energy that goes through our minds.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a raw material.
Yeah.
And it keeps flowing like a stream, like a river. It's always going to keep going. Or buses. There's always going to be another one. It always continues a flow through your mind. So if you were to try and stop that or challenge it, it'd be like you'd be disrupting the system. So, for example, where I live now, I live right in the center of Jerusalem, and I live near a very busy market. And the buses come here and they go all over the city. So there's a bus stop not far from my house, a few blocks, and there's buses constantly. And so if I'm going to visit a friend and I'm looking for, let's say, the 74,
yeah,
and the number 18 comes, I don't have to stand in the middle of the street and say, stop. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. I don't want that bus. Yeah. Everybody stop. Yeah. I mean, first of all, that would cause probably an accident. It would cause a chaos, and it would make me very unpopular. So that's not very helpful. Right? Yeah. So I just watch the 18 go by, and the 32, and there's a 74. So the 74 I want, and so I get on and I go to visit my friend.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that with thoughts. When I have an uncomfortable thought, and I do, like I'm human and I can have an uncomfortable thought, I've learned not to fight it. And there's no need, in my understanding, to color it, name it, challenge it. It's already happened. Yeah. To me, that's like trying to get the toothpaste back in the tube, right? The thought has already happened. I have free will to decide what to do with that. I can either shout at the bus, for like getting in the way, or I can just let it go because it's nothing to do with me.
Yeah. Just
let it go. Now, people say then, but that's hard. How do you do that with a painful thought, or a painful memory, or the PTSD that I was going through? And I see now that I think that actually, one of my favorite quotes, the man who put the kind of ideas, this new paradigm in psychology I'm talking about, his name was Sydney Banks. If your listeners want to look him up, sydneybanks.com is a great resource. And Sydney Banks, his favorite quote, my favorite quote of his is that if only people could learn not to be afraid of their own experience, that would change the world. If only you could learn not to be afraid of your own experience, that would change the world. Because if you think about all the distress that happens in the world, including like hate and violence, racism, sexism, like all that stuff, all that hate that's going on, is coming from, and I'm going to use the word innocent, like an innocent misunderstanding of what happens in our heads. And I'll give you an example. This understanding that I'm using with my clients, I've got colleagues who use it in a lot of different areas. Like I'm using it with trauma and back pain and things like that. I've got friends who use it in the corporate world and in family counseling, addictions. There's a treatment center now in Florida that's using this approach. And a friend of mine uses it in prisons in England. And she's in 2 prisons near Birmingham and Nottingham in England. And she's taken these ideas into the prison. And I went last year when I was in England, I went to visit her and I went into the prison with her. And this is high security prison. We're talking about murderers, gangbangers, armed robbers, really, really serious guys. Yeah. And she's been working with a small group of these guys for about maybe a year, six months at least. And she'd been teaching them these ideas. And when I was there, I was privileged enough to see them on their graduation of this program, like a peer mentoring program, and they were then going to go on and mentor other guys on their wing. Yeah. And I have to tell you, I was in a room with 15 of these guys, and there was me and my friend and a couple of other practitioners, facilitators. There was so much love in that room and respect. It was, I was in tears. Yeah. These guys, these guys are like tattooed, some of them aren't getting out ever. They had so much love and respect for each other because they had seen so clearly that the reason they were sat there was because they had a thought and then they acted on it. Because they innocently thought it was truth, that they thought it was real, that they had to kill or they had to rob, they had to whatever, that they had that thought, so it must be true. Like going back to the special effects thing, if you think it's, that dog is talking, then maybe dogs can talk. It's like this thought, this raw material we have that goes through our minds. I can either be creative with it and have joy with it, or I can have anxiety, or I can create violence and havoc with it. And so these men were so clear on that they'd misunderstood the thoughts that they were having. And that's why they were sitting there. It was turning their lives around, and they'd become free of the guilt and I'm not saying they weren't sorry for what they'd done. They really were. They were just these amazing human beings who just saw truth now rather than blame and anger. And the next day we actually had a meeting with the governor. And he said that his prison officers had said they've seen the level of violence going down on the wing, because these guys are walking away from trouble instead of causing it, right? Because they know that that's not the answer anymore. And then on the 3rd day, we watched these men give a presentation to the other guys on the wing who were lining up to come and hear what was happening. And to see this transformation in people, and I've seen it with the people I work with in terms of trauma and anxiety and all that stuff. It's when you see that you are not your thoughts, and there actually is nothing you have to do about it, because the system is built so that the thoughts will keep going. That's why you don't actually have to do anything, which I think this is what people find really hard to comprehend. And that's way too simple for my difficult problems. You don't understand what I've been through, because I know that's how I reacted. Yeah. But I want to use my little example here. I have a little prop. And it's my little snow globe. It's a little camel. You see it? So people who are just listening, imagine a snow globe. Yeah. If you shake up a snow globe, right, the snow is going to keep, every time I shake it, it's going to keep being mixed up. Yeah. And I think that's what that's what I was doing in my PTSD, in that loop of reliving and the blaming and the anger and hurting myself and all this, that negative stuff. But it's also with, I only went to the psychiatrist briefly in that time. And I remember all she said to me was, can you tell me what happened? And what do you feel about what happened? And I'm like, I was like shocked, because I could stay at home and relive it. How was going into her office and reliving it going to help?
Yeah.
All that was doing was mixing it up. It was shaking up the snow globe again.
Mm-hmm.
But the brilliant thing about snow globes is that if I just hold it still, then it will just settle on its own. And like the wisdom of my mind shutting off when it got too painful and going like the hairdryer, if you actually just let your thinking alone, it will actually settle on its own. Now, few of us have the patience or the interest in doing that, because a lot of us, especially the people who are probably listening, are very much do it, fix it people. Tell me what to do. I'll journal. I'll write. I'll go to India. I'll do. Whatever. Tell me what to do.
Yeah.
That sitting there and doing nothing is actually very hard. So, what I'm not suggesting to actually sit there and do nothing. I'm saying get on with the next right thing. So when I was presented with these ideas, I found them very threatening, because my story that I'd been telling myself over and over again, and I would happily tell you and I'd happily tell him, had become part of my identity. So to let go of that story of I'm the girl who was attacked 3 times, or I'm the girl who was in the movies, or whatever stories we have that we tell ourselves, to let go of that was actually quite threatening. But I found that that's actually where the freedom is that there's a whole nother world of you waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Once you let go of that tiny little story. Once I realized the story I was holding on to so desperately was actually very small. And look what's happened to my life since I let go of it, like traveling around the world and working with movie stars and now writing a book and, how did that happen?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, of course. And it's, I think obviously after listening to all this, it's something that, like we mentioned at the start of the episode, is it's sometimes quite hard for people to understand. And as you said there, like, you don't understand my problems are way bigger than what you're saying. It's not just a simple matter of I've got thoughts in my head and I can just kind of get rid of the bad ones and go into the good ones. Because for some people, it's always, or what they feel is that it's always bad thoughts, is that constantly in their brain, when you're dealing with stuff like depression, and the way that people deal with it is that they just lock themselves in more and more. So I can understand that maybe they're just submerging all their sort of happy thoughts or all their positive thoughts and keeping the bad ones out. But it's quite difficult for them to kind of challenge that, if you know what I mean. I'm personally someone who suffers with anxiety quite a lot. I'm a very stressful person, and I think the main reason for that is I put a lot of I need to be this within this time. I need to do this with my career, and I need to become the best that I could possibly come, and I need to make myself and everyone around me very proud of myself. And I'm like, I don't really want to do that. And the main thing around it is I've put myself in a state of constant anxiety that sometimes there's no thoughts. Well, I feel that there's no thoughts behind it. Sometimes I'll just feel worried and anxious, and then someone will be like, well, what are you feeling anxious about? I'm like, I don't know. Generally, there's nothing in my head that I'm feeling anxious about. I'm just feeling anxious, and I can understand to a level that there is sort of subconscious and submerged thoughts there. There's still thoughts. They're still going on. They're not on the top of my brain where I can pick one out and be like, this is exactly what's keeping me anxious. But I know for a fact that sometimes I just feel worried, and I don't even know why. There's no thought behind it. There's no anything behind it. So I can imagine there's a lot of people that go through that and go through it with so the way they deal with other people socially, their cognition, if they're depressed, if they're anxious. I would imagine that would be the case as well. I'd never like to think that I'm the only person that's going through, because I definitely am.
You're definitely not the only person.
Not at all. Yeah, definitely. So I can understand, and I think the main aspect is we always try and find a way to kind of deal with our journey in the best possible way. We've always said that psychology I've always said psychology touches us in different ways depending on what we've went through and how it is that we were how our mental health deteriorated, and whether that deteriorated into mental illness or what we would call mental illness. Because I think another interesting kind of thing that I kind of understood there is that when you say the myth of low self-esteem, is that we tend to give things names and tend to kind of make a big story about them when we don't really need to. It reminds me a lot of Zen meditation. And I don't know if you've personally looked into or kind of know a lot about that, but I had, I think over the last year and a half, I've been really intrigued into Zen meditation because I found that's a way of stopping. I'm someone who's like a million miles an hour. You know, I'm always thinking. I'm a business graduate. I work in business, I work in management, and I work in like 2 different businesses and the podcast. And I'm always thinking of new things that I can do. So how is it that I could not stop my thoughts, but be in peace with my thoughts, not have to fight each and every single one. And I actually do a bit of guided meditation right at the end of every episode because I feel like it's a good way to kind of go, like you would say with the traffic. Imagine there's traffic on a really kind of long motorway and cars are going in and out of each other, undertaking and overtaking and beeping at each other. And your first initial thing that you want to do is you want to go and stop every car. Be like, no, you go there, you go there, you go there. And you want to organize and schedule everything. But sometimes the best thing to do is kind of just to sit back and watch the cars go. Like watch the thoughts as they happen, instead of kind of trying to change them and trying to stop them and trying to understand what's positive and what's negative and what to kind of do there. And I feel that it's basically what Zen meditation is, because you're concentrating more on your breathing, you're concentrating on your physical surroundings, on your sort of sounds and senses more than the thoughts that's in your head. But if the thoughts do come, that's fine. You know, it's just very easily going, you know, it's okay that a thought came. It's normal, but I don't have to give it my full attention, and I don't have to take away from my peace to go back into this and deal with this right this second. So it's very similar to both sort of aspects there of how to challenge your thoughts. People can take of it that, you know, challenge your thoughts doesn't mean that you have to challenge each and every single thought. And challenging your thoughts doesn't mean sit down and fight with it. It just means I don't have to make you my everything right now. I don't have to concentrate on you so much. I can just kind of move on to the next thought, like you say with the buses. Okay, I don't want you. I want this guy. And you kind of just move on your life from there. So it's really quite interesting, but I can understand why there's so many people out there who will listen to this and kind of go, you just don't know what I've been through. You know, this is all my life, Hannah. There's no happy thoughts. There's no happy thoughts. There's no 74 bus. It's always the 80 and the 32. And that's just all I'm getting. And I've been thinking for ages.
You just made me think of something, reminded me of something like when people say like, I'm always depressed or I'm constantly, you know, anxious, whatever. Yeah. But if you were to follow someone around who had said that with a video camera, and you follow them around for 24 hours, I bet you will notice there are times when they are not so depressed or not anxious, because when they're, I don't know, when they're buying a coffee or they're, you know, like had to answer the phone, and, you know, it's amazing that like sometimes you see that in a movie, like the girl's crying her eyes out and then, hi, how you doing? You know, like we can do that, you know, you can. So if you can do that, that means you can do it some more. Because I think that goes back to this thing of how we tell ourselves stories, which is a lot of thinking, that I'm always depressed, or I'm a victim, or I'm the girl who, you know, and it's like, so we start getting this story, and the more you repeat it, it becomes real. And sorry, I think my phone is making some noise.
Don't worry about it. I have to say.
And so it was. And so it's so this stories that we tell ourselves kind of then become our identity. And like you were saying about labels, like the reason I called the book the Myth of Low Self-Esteem was because when I first moved to California, and when my movie career took me there, and And I kept hearing people talking about their low self-esteem, like the terrible things that, they were dealing with. And I was fascinated because being very English and suddenly being in California, I was fascinated by these people because I'd never met a bunch of more self-obsessed, self-possessed, self-centered, a lot of self,
Yeah, 100%.
And they're talking about their low self-esteem in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not low self-esteem.
Yeah, of course, right? of course.
And so, and I put this into the book in a particular conversation I was having with a client, and she was, in the story, she's talking about her low self-esteem. And as like Deborah being like kind of me, like was so curious about like who told you that? Who told you had low self-esteem? And she said, well, my therapist told me that. And then my character Deborah works out that the girl had just come from her NA meeting, her Narcotics Anonymous meeting.
Uh-huh.
And let's say there was probably 100 people in that meeting. In LA, there's tons of these 12-step meetings, and there's a lot of people who go,
Yeah.
And I said to her, were you sharing at your NA meeting about your low self-esteem? She said, yeah. In front of 100 people? I was like, you don't have low self-esteem. You just think you have low self-esteem. It's a big difference.
Yeah.
And so that's why I called it the myth, because I kept meeting all these people who talked about their low self-esteem. But if you ask them enough questions, what I found is that what they were really talking about was that they were upset or sometimes angry that the world or a person hadn't treated them right. That they hadn't gotten the job, the movie or whatever it is, or the boss had treated them badly, or the boyfriend had treated them badly. And so this was like, affecting their self-esteem. And I was thinking, hold on a minute, if you had low self-esteem and somebody treats you bad, then surely that would make sense.
Yeah.
Because if you think you're a piece of dirt and people treat you like dirt, then surely that makes sense. If you're unhappy that people treat you like dirt, or they didn't call you back, or they don't pay you enough, or whatever it is, surely that means your self-esteem is somewhere up here because it's complaining.
You deserve more.
I think I should be treated better.
Yeah.
Right? Now, whatever it is, that's just a lot of thinking. And I think that's what a lot of mental illness is. And that's what my teachers have taught me, who are psychiatrists and who've been, working in this field for, 40, 50 years. Is that actually my teacher, George Pransky, who's a psychiatrist in Seattle, and he described the DSM, the book I referred to earlier, which is the directory of mental illnesses that's used in the mental health profession. He said it's actually a list of coping mechanisms. It's how people cope. So some people cope with their distress thinking by overeating. Some people cope by cutting themselves. Some people cope through violence, like the guys I met in the prison. Some people cope by talking to themselves. Some people cope by, like washing their hands 100 times or checking the door, or, there's many, many ways. And panic, like you were talking about, like anxiety or panic attacks, or not knowing where those thoughts are coming from, or those feelings or that experience. I guarantee you, if you sit down and ask anybody who's had a panic attack what was going on beforehand, I bet you they were having some distress thinking beforehand. And if you play the tape backwards before that, I bet you there was some overthinking before that. And before that was some unresolved guilt, resentment, hurt feelings, something like that. So it's like a chain reaction. As far as I know and I've been taught, it doesn't actually come from anywhere. People say, yeah, but I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat and a panic attack. And like, what were you thinking about before you went to sleep? So if you were stressing about, your mom's cancer or your finances or, your student loan or whatever it was, before you went to sleep, that's all kind of gone into the mind. And the mind, I trained as a trauma volunteer. I'm a World Health Organization first responder with a psychotrauma unit here in Israel. And what we learned, I'm sure your listeners have learned about the fight or flight response, the stress response, which is basically, if you were, God forbid, in an emergency, like a burning house or tigers coming, that our body is amazing and it's being built this way to send cortisol and glucose and adrenaline immediately into your body so that you can survive, so you can run, you can, lift that car off your toddler, whatever, terrible thing has happened.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, if you're sitting and worrying, you're also putting those chemicals and those stress hormones into your body because you're worrying about your Facebook page or your student loan or whatever it is, or you know, and like I was going to say serious things, but serious things are different to different people.
Yeah.
You know, and so if you're the way we're designed is to escape from the burning building. It should take about 20 minutes. Those chemicals, it was designed, our bodies were designed so that would last in our bodies for about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. And it takes about 72 hours for that to dissolve so that you're ready for, you know, the next emergency, you know, when, you know, like life-threatening kind of situation. But if you're sitting in anxiety for 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 16 hours a day, it's going to have an effect on your body. So that's why it feels like we're always anxious, because you've got those chemicals running around your body the whole time. They haven't had a chance to leave, because we're constantly, you know, the way we live in the modern world is we're constantly under a lot of stress that a lot of it I put on myself because of, you know, like my business plan, or when my book came out, that it was very like, I was going to check the Amazon, you know, Amazon every day, like, you know, did I sell another book, you know, and I was like, what am I doing to myself? You know, it's like,
exactly, that's not the point of what I'm doing here. Exactly.
Right. Hold on a minute, I'm getting all anxious about my book sales. You know?
Exactly.
You know? And I was like, okay, slow down. But then I was like, I wanted to see, like, is this exciting or is it anxiety? You know, like sometimes it's hard to tell the difference.
Yeah.
And because it's the same, your body doesn't know the difference actually. If you start putting chemicals into your body about, like, if the chemicals go in because I've just been in a car accident, let's say, whether I was hit or I caused it, let's say, you know, my body is now full of adrenaline and glucose and cortisol and a lot of other things. Now, that's happening in the moment. But if I'm sitting there worrying about next week, like say a business presentation or a finals in school or whatever it is, my body doesn't know that that's in the future. All it knows is I'm putting those chemicals into my body. And so what can happen is when you start living from that place, is the body gets used to it. Because it's become a habit to constantly have that, you know, adrenaline feeling. And that's why people get very, like when I had PTSD, I got startle reaction. The startle response is very common with people with anxiety and PTSD, because you're constantly in this heightened state of hyper, you know,
fight or flight,
like vigilance. And so it's almost like my body, I'm going to use the word addicted. It got into a habit of experiencing those chemicals. So when my brain went quiet and it slowed down, it was weird because I was used to being in this heightened state of, you know, vigilance all the time. Yeah. I knew something else was going to go wrong. Like you were saying before.
Just waiting for the next thing. Yeah. Right,
because, you know, life sucks, and that's what life is like, and it always goes wrong, and it is, you know, it never works out, and that's my life. See what happened? I just had another 2 seconds there of overthinking. Yeah. And I actually started catching myself in those loops of making lists of what was wrong. This is wrong and that's wrong, and she didn't call me back, and they don't pay me enough, and, you know, all the stuff that goes around. And so when I was back in my, you know, different, you know, ways of dealing with it, I actually taught myself not to keep making lists, because I never made positive ones. they were always, you know, this is wrong and that's wrong.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the opposite of that, you know, is gratitude. And so living from a place of gratitude, I started seeing that I could still be in a very difficult situation. Like a tornado is a good way of explaining that. You know how a tornado is like, I was going to say it's like a hurricane, but that isn't right. Anyway, my metaphors mixed up. Anyway, when a tornado goes over, there's the what we know is the eye of the tornado, right? There's that place in the middle of peace.
Yeah.
So it's like a belief that you can be in the middle of a tornado and be at peace. So, because I think what happens is when people come across these ideas, and whether it's, you know, like the ideas that I'm describing, which has a name, it's called the 3 principles. Or sometimes it's called innate health, because we believe that everybody is innately healthy, mentally well. Or yoga, or like you were saying, or the techniques, you know, whatever someone's found, and if that's working for them, I think that's great.
Yeah.
But I think what happens sometimes is people come across a new idea and they think, like, if I can just master this, if I can just get the meditation really down really well, or I can just get that yoga pose, or I can just remember to journal, then life is going to be peaceful, and everything's going to go my way, and nobody's going to annoy me, and my boss is going to promote me, and and then
the other side,
right, and then the boss doesn't promote you, and that yoga pose just isn't happening. And, oh my gosh, it's not working. But it's not. That's why personally I don't tell my clients about techniques and methods anymore, because I don't know about you, but when I'm in a really dark or difficult place, and it could, I can have a funk sometimes. I'm not in the mood to journal, and I can't sit still for a meditation, and I've even forgotten about it, and then I remember, I should have counted to 10 or something, and then I beat myself up because I didn't remember to count to 10, and I didn't remember to journal, and I couldn't meditate. So I find techniques are really good for the person who invented them. Right?
I completely agree with you on that one. Yeah.
Are they useful for me in that moment? So that's why I've kind of gone to a different place of understanding different levels of consciousness, kind of can I be in a very difficult situation and not get freaked out by it? Like going back to that quote from Sydney Banks is, can I learn not to be frightened by my own experience? And then people say, yeah, but I have flashbacks. I have, we're talking about serious, hands sweating, wake up in the middle of the night, reliving, God forbid, a rape or a mugging or something, I've worked with girls who've suffered rape and all kinds of things, and what they've seen is even when they have a flashback to that, or even just memories, it's gonna pass. And so I did that. So for me, my trigger thing was the sound of footsteps. The three men that beat me up, the sound of footsteps, them coming up behind me, stayed with me for a very long time, for years and years afterwards. And I could have been walking on the boardwalk in Los Angeles, on the beach in Venice, and beautiful sunny day with friends on the boardwalk, and I'd hear footsteps behind me, and it would freak me out.
Yeah.
And it was usually someone jogging, or it could be here, it could be someone running for a bus, or a kid late for school.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, but then I thought, why am I still a victim of this thing that's hasn't happened now for 10 years? It's been 20, it's almost 30 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I'm not frightened by footsteps anymore. And by not being frightened of them, I can choose. Sometimes it might be a good idea to look, sometimes if you're not in a safe place, it's a good idea to make sure what's happening behind you.
Yeah.
Or I can just say, and sometimes it doesn't even register with me anymore. So what I'm trying to say is that the more I understood that I'm only actually ever thinking my experience, the mugging isn't happening right now, the boss thing isn't happening right now, I'm only experiencing my thoughts, then I don't have to be frightened of them. They're just made of some spooky spiritual energy that's going through my mind. and it's gonna pass. I can tell you from my own experience is it gets quieter. It doesn't come so often. And for me, it actually doesn't come at all anymore.
Yeah.
And for my friends who are still experiencing flashbacks with some really, really terrible things, is that they've learned not to be frightened by it. And they can actually experience it. And I'm not saying they choose it or they'd probably be happy if it didn't happen, but it's not the end of the world, because before, when I experienced those kind of things, I had a lot of back pain from my injuries. And I was actually paralyzed a few times from that. Every time that happened, I'm thinking, this is it. I'm going to be paralyzed for the rest of my life. I'm going to be in a wheelchair. It's going to be surgery. And that would just make me more tense, which would make the experience last longer. If I'm not frightened by it, it will either come less often, it's less painful, and eventually disappears.
Yeah, no, I can relate to a lot of what you mentioned there. I think it's going to be the same for our listeners. I think some of them are going to highly relate to what you're saying, and some of them who are maybe, like you said, went through a different journey or are not touched by traumatic experiences, but more just they don't really understand why they're going through the mental health that they're going through. Because I have friends that have amazing parents, they're loving family's going well, they've done well in their life, they have money, they have friends, but for some reason they are, bad mental health, full of anxiety, full of depressive thoughts. And I personally believe that it's kind of, there's a shift now in mental health, because I can't tell you what it is, but most people that I will talk to will have sort of mental health issues, or some sort of mental health issues, especially at sort of the generation that I'm in, and even younger ones are even, it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. And sometimes I do think of it and like I look at people and that part inside of me kind of goes, it makes a judgment. It makes a judgment in which it goes, well, no, there's nothing really wrong with you. You're just kind of obsessing over something that isn't really a big deal. And that's maybe the big thing. But obviously for you, it is a big deal. It's the difference between what's serious, like you've mentioned, serious for me changes than serious for you.
But if I was talking to someone in that situation, I would stress the word innocent. It's an innocent misunderstanding of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to think, well, my heart's pounding, so therefore it must be real, or like there's something wrong with me. No, your heart's pounding because you had thoughts that activated your stress response. And that's just an innocent misunderstanding. And so when I'm working with people, or like work with kids, because like kids are such a great example, because you can see like a little kid and they have like an absolute tantrum over like they didn't get the candy, or they lost their teddy bear, or whatever it is. They're screaming and screaming, and then you give them the candy or the teddy bear and they're like, fine. It's like nothing happened. They have this amazing resilience. And I think we all have that amazing resilience. It's just gotten covered up with this thinking that there's something wrong with me, that there's like, I'm always anxious, which isn't true, because like we just said that, if you follow someone, they're not always anxious or depressed or whatever label they put on themselves. And so therefore it's an innocent misunderstanding of what's actually happening. And the other innocent misunderstanding is that there's something out there. If only I could have this or not have that or get to that place, then I'm going to be okay. And all of that is like, say, I would stress the word innocent in the, like, until I understood it, until I had some really great mentors who like really taught me this stuff, that I really didn't know what was happening. I was convinced there was something wrong with me, which wasn't true.
Of course, no, I completely get that. And before we kind of wrap up, I want to kind of just pinpoint a couple of things, because I think the main thing that I want to do out of this episode is I want to ensure that people aren't misunderstanding what you're saying as well. I think one of the main things is that you're not taking away from anyone's suffering. You definitely believe that the suffering is real, and that's what you mean by innocent misunderstanding, is that the suffering 100% is real. It is definitely there. It's just more of how we perceive the suffering, and where the suffering has come from. Instead of kind of making it all our world, we can focus more on the not so negative thoughts, the not so negative experiences, and concentrate more on the fact that there is good in our life. Yeah, life is chaos, but there is goodness in our life. And the second thing that I've been thinking about this whole episode, and I've had to kind of stop myself from asking the questions, because I'm like, that's a different thing, Omar. Mental illness and mental health are very different from mental disability. There is, when sometimes we talk about, I think one of the main questions that I was going to kind of talk to you there, I'm a huge true crime fan. I read and, I watch a lot of like sort of, true crime documentaries and books and podcasts and stuff. And one of the main things that interests me is the psychology of it all. And I think it's a completely different thing when we're talking about people that have sort of mental disabilities and their brain doesn't function a certain way or doesn't allow them to feel certain emotions, or certain chemicals aren't given to their bodies because of that, is very, very different than when you have mental health and mental illness, which is just negative thoughts, anxious thoughts, depressive thoughts, suicidal thoughts, thoughts that you're not good enough, all that sort of stuff. Not something that allows you to deal with other people as well, or cause, or not be able to understand consequences, or not be able to understand love or emotions or stuff like that. The main reason I wanted to kind of put that out is that I didn't want anyone sitting there going, well, what about this people, and what about this person? And because there has been a lot of true crime stuff that's been coming out on really popular platforms like Netflix and stuff like that, it's something that I always try and kind of make sure that people understand the differences between mental health issues, mental illness, and mental disability, because it comes in different ways. And I'm not saying that mental disability is 100% all about serial killers and true crime people. There's a lot of very normal living people out there with, whether it's severe or small mental disabilities. So I wanted to just make sure that my listeners or our listeners have kind of got the difference between what we're saying. It's not that because a lot of people listen to something and just group everything together and go, well, you're wrong because you're talking about absolutely everything. And we're not. We're really talking about a specific journeys and specific ways that people are thinking, and the specific ways that actually most of us are living our life. Because most of us are living our life in constant thought. And I always say that there's a constant internal chatter in our head. It can be negative, it can be positive, but it's always there. You're always talking to yourself. And when some perspectives of psychology have looked at that as it's just a different being talking to you. When you're thinking, you're actually talking to your brain, which I think is nuts. I think that's absolutely nuts. I think it's not talking. Sometimes you don't even have the option to talk back. It is just a thought. It's just come. There's nothing you can do about it. So it's been really interesting looking at sort of the perspectives that you've put across there as well, and it's been great listening to your journey, because it definitely is it's a full journey. It's a story. It definitely is a story, and it's great that you're sharing it, because there is a lot of people that wouldn't want to share and don't want to talk about themselves, and it's not about you wanting to talk about yourself. It's more of just, this is the journey. This is what I've went through, guys. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel, going through even what I've went through, which is thinking I can't even leave my house. At the end of it all, I have managed to leave my house. I've managed to do amazing things, and now I'm living the dream, really. So it's cool. It's really cool to hear that, even from someone from my perspective as well, because like I say, I'm someone that's still in the middle of my journey. I'm still trying to find my internal peace. And the reason I've started this podcast is exactly that I thought it can be a collective journey with other people where we learn from different people and different things. And I thank you so much for being a part of this journey, Chana. I thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's been a great chat, and
thank you.
Yeah, it's been absolutely awesome.
Thank you.
So yeah, we're gonna wrap it up here, unless you have anything else that you would like to add, or any sort of message that you would like to give the listeners of the show today, or anything.
When you were just talking there at the end, it just made me think of one quick last thing. Is I'm sure everybody's heard the phrase that to explain someone's doing the best they can. Yeah. I'm sure my mother used to say that, oh, she's doing the best she can. Yeah. For the longest time when I heard that, I would interpret that as like, yeah, but they could do better. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But if you think about it, everybody is doing the best they can with the thinking they have in that moment. Yeah. And that includes someone with a mental disability. I had a student for a long time who is, it was called Asperger's then. I think they've changed the description of it now, but like, she was doing the best she could too. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people would meet her and like be, frustrated, annoyed with her. Yeah. She had zero social skills, yeah. But she was brilliant in so many other ways. Yeah. And I was thinking, like, she's doing the best she can. And I think, so I'm doing the best I can too. Yeah. Everybody is doing the best they can with the thinking they have in that moment. And from that place, it helps me to have a lot more compassion for other people and for myself. Yeah. And once you start having compassion for yourself, then you can have more compassion for other people. And that kind of just makes the world a much better place.
Goes on, definitely. And I think if you don't have compassion for yourself, there's no way that you're moving on from your negative thoughts, because you blame yourself for them all. Well, that's a great way to end the show. Definitely a great way to end the episode today. Again, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And yeah, till next time.
So there we are. That was our conversation with Chana Studley we just had a great chat, and she's a lovely, lovely person. And like I say, we had a few chats before that as well, and it was just always very nice to speak to her. She's got some great social media channels as well. There is a page or a group that she's using on Facebook called Understanding Stress, Anxiety and Trauma. It is a closed group, so you'll have to kind of request to join, but I would really recommend to, because there's some beautiful content on there. A lot of people are sharing, and a lot of help, and there's a lot of like books and where to kind of go and what to read and stuff. So yeah, I'd really recommend to kind of look more into her work, look more at the three perspectives that we have discussed, do your own research, because one thing that my eyes were really open to in this sort of episode, and when we had the chat, was your journey is your journey. Your options are your options, and you can learn so many techniques, and you can listen to this podcast and you can listen to what I say, but at the end of the day, really, it's all about what you choose to do and how you choose to, what relationship you choose to have with your own mind. These are words to myself as they're much to anyone else as well. I'm going to leave you guys here today because I know it has been quite a long episode. There's been a lot of information to take in. I'm actually going to release a separate 5-minute mindful guided meditation the day that this podcast comes out as well, because I know it has been quite a long episode, so it's just going to be for people who actually want to listen to that. And it means that it's just there as well for if you're wanting to go back and just have 5 minutes of meditation. Again, I always recommend the app Headspace. We are not sponsored by them, but we just really appreciate their work. Give them a shout as well. And yeah, just have a great couple of weeks. Enjoy yourself. Be kind to yourself. Easter Saturday is tomorrow, so have a great time. It's probably going to be a few days when you guys are listening to this, but it's tomorrow for me when I'm recording this, and I'm going away to Newcastle. Very excited to be visiting Newcastle for the first time, but I'll tell you guys all about that on our next episode and what I got to there, and hopefully I'll have a couple of pictures of some cool places that I can put on Instagram as well. But yeah, up until next episode, have a great time, enjoy yourself, and be kind to yourself, be mindful, be in peace.